In the episode Mudslide, we learn that Clayface's body is breaking down and that he will die without a very expensive procedure. So in order to save his own life, he steals money to fund this treatment and breaks into Wayne Biomedical to get his hands on a rare isotope that he needs. Batman tracks Clayface to his hideout and stops the treatment before it can be properly administered. There's a scuffle, Batman and Clayface end up outside in the rain, and they both tumble over the edge of a cliff. Clayface falls into the ocean to his apparent death. Many fans have questioned why Batman would do such a thing. Why would Batman kill Clayface? Clayface was moments away from being cured, they argue. Why was Batman so cruel? I think that there are a lot of misconceptions around this episode, and in this video I'm going to try to clear them up by examining what actually happened and why it went down the way it did. First things first, let's just ignore the fact that Clayface eventually returned years later after his remains were exposed to weird chemicals that were dumped into the sea. For all intents and purposes, Clayface was dead when he dissolved in the ocean, and he wasn't going to come back. Now, the next thing we have to discuss is what's actually happening in that lab. Many fans latch on to the moment where Clayface begins to seemingly transform back into Matt Hagen, and take it as a sign that he was turning back into a human being. But that is not the case. Yes, Batman turned off the machine that was being used to treat Clayface, but it's important to remember that this treatment wasn't going to cure him and make him human again. It was going to stop his cellular degradation, but the most important thing is that it was going to enhance his powers, giving him the ability to split off parts of his body and have control of them, and potentially allow him to maintain his disguises for longer with less effort, essentially allowing him to have his cake and eat it. Think back to the scene where Stella demonstrated the healing properties of the MP40 by inserting a sample of it into a little weepy lump of clay. If the MP40 was going to cure him, then it would have turned the clay lump into a lump of human flesh. What actually happened is the clay regained its consistency, and it gave Clayface control over its shape. This is an important preview for Clayface's abilities when he returns in the new Batman adventures. It's important to note that Batman seems to be aware of the effects of the MP40, as he casually turns the machine off, informing Clayface and Stella that
"It's over, Hagen. The lab boys can take it from here,"
indicating that the police are going to take over Clayface's treatment, presumably while he's incarcerated. Note that in this final act, that's the only thing Batman does. He flips a switch. He doesn't attack Clayface or Stella. His original plan was to freeze Clayface, which would have stopped him from melting, by the way, but Clayface knocked the canister out the window. He spends most of his time trying to avoid Clayface, even when Clayface tries to smother him inside of his clay flesh. Yes, Batman violently escapes by launching his bat grapple through Clayface's head. Ouch. But that was his only option. Every act of aggression comes from Clayface. It's his anger that ultimately leads to his downfall. Look how Clayface lashes out at Batman after he perches atop of Stella's machine. Batman easily dodges the attack, leading to Clayface destroying the machine that had been prolonging his life. Likewise, it's Clayface that lunges at Batman, forcing him outside. He had every opportunity to turn around, go back inside and surrender. Instead, he lunges at Batman, dragging them both over the edge, effectively killing himself. Clayface does this because he believes he has no other option. It's either he lets his condition slowly kill him, or he can speed things up and try to take Batman with him. I have to think that he knew that this was going to happen, and that he'd rather take control of his own fate than be taken in and treated like a lab rat. You might find yourself wondering why Clayface wouldn't willingly accept Batman's help, but remember how accepting the help of a stranger worked out for him last time. Not very well. And it's sad to note that he seemingly had a change of heart as the reality of his impending death dawned on him. He latches onto Batman in a desperate attempt to hold on, but it's too late. Batman knows it's futile, but he tries to grab a hold of Clayface anyway, urging him to pull himself together. I know that this answer likely won't satisfy you all, but there's another key factor that influenced the outcome of this story, and that's the Batman comic books. It's no secret that the BTAS creative team loved the Batman comics of the 1970s. That's when many of them were kids and reading the monthly adventures of the Caped Crusader. They adapted many stories from this era, even bringing in authors from the comics to adapt their own stories into episodes, like The Demon's Quest, written by Denny O'Neil, Moon of the Wolf by Len Wein, and The Cape and the Cowl Conspiracy by Elliot S. Maggin. During this era, the third Clayface was introduced. Preston Payne was a deformed scientist that wanted nothing more than to be handsome and go on dates with pretty ladies. So desperate was he that he injected himself with a substance he isolated from the blood of the second Clayface, Matt Hagen. This temporarily granted him the ability to change his looks, but things quickly went wrong and his body began to melt, forcing him to wear an exosuit that helped to maintain his form. He also discovered that his touch could make people melt into a pool of protoplasm. A big part of this introductory story was Clayface breaking into labs to steal components for a procedure that would cure him of his affliction. So we have a Clayface whose body is falling apart and can only be sustained by being placed in a suit, who is stealing components for a potential cure. Now that sounds familiar, doesn't it? One of the strengths of Batman the Animated Series was the way they took the source material, the comic books, and kept all the best parts, dropped all the rubbish, and added extra details to suit the world that they had built. One key thing from the end of the story is that Batman tracks Clayface down to his lair and interrupts the procedure, preventing him from being cured. Batman is furious with Clayface because along the way he's murdered multiple innocent people. Batman knows that if he can disable the powerful motors in Clayface's exosuit, he'll effectively become powerless, and Batman can then ensure that he's punished for his crimes. During the fight, the lair is set on fire and Batman drags the helpless Clayface to safety. After Batman hands Clayface over to the police, Clayface runs back into the burning lair to rescue his mannequin girlfriend, yes that was a thing, and is presumed dead after the building collapses on him. And it should be clear by now that Mudslide is a loose adaptation of Clayface III's first story, and ultimately that's why Batman switches off the machine, because that's what he did in the comics. Although let's be clear, Beat-ass Batman is not driven by vengeance. He's not avenging anyone's death, and he doesn't really seem to care too much about his MP40 being stolen. He's trying to force Clayface to accept his help the right way. There's also the fact that if the MP40 treatment had been successful, Clayface would have become more dangerous than ever. Batman had to turn that machine off. It was the only thing he could do in that situation. Everything that happened after the switch was flipped happened because of Clayface and his anger. Vanity may have been one of Clayface's flaws, but his anger is what ultimately led to his downfall. The initial outline for the story was put together by producer Alan Burnett, who recently discussed being aware of the comic book story in an interview on Batman the Animated Series podcast, and thought it would be fun to adapt. The writer of the episode, Steve Perry, told me that he wasn't aware of the comic book story and that he intended for Clayface to be viewed as a Frankensteinian tragic monster whose mind was slowly melting away, sort of like an Alzheimer's patient, resulting in him lashing out at everyone and everything. Given the way that people reacted to this episode, placing all the blame for Clayface's death on Batman, I think he succeeded in this task. Despite being a horrible person, both as Matt Hagen and Clayface, it's a testament to the writing on this show that Clayface is often viewed as one of the most tragic characters in a roster of tragic villains. Clayface is an interesting villain in that he's not really that interested in committing crimes, except for when he feels like he has to. From his earliest appearance in Feet of Clay, in which he helped Roland Daggett in exchange for a steady supply of the chemical that allowed him to restore his lost beauty, all the way through to Mudslide, where he commits theft in order to fund his medical treatment, he only commits crimes when he views it as being absolutely necessary. He steals from the wealthy, yes, but he doesn't victimize the everyday citizens of Gotham. Unless you count scaring the crap out of a train full of them, although frankly that rude little girl was asking for it. But he is capable of awful acts of violence and even murder if he feels it's necessary. However, in this case, the person responsible for Clayface's death was Clayface himself. In his efforts to kill Batman, he destroyed the machine that was extending his life. He forced Batman out into the rain and dived off the edge of the cliff in a malicious attempt to kill Batman as well as himself. Despite all of this, Batman tried to save him, multiple times in fact. But Clayface refused to accept his help until it was too late. And that is not Batman's fault.